Is Benjamin Netanyahu's war machine now under such severe strain that the rehabilitation system for wounded troops is reaching breaking point, with officials warning it can no longer cope? With more than 26,000 troops already seeking rehabilitation after October 7th, is Israel facing a hidden avalanche of trauma that could haunt this war long after the guns fall silent? Amid the ongoing war, can Israel handle a parallel mental health crisis, as thousands of young soldiers return from the front carrying invisible psychological scars? As Mujtaba's men watch from the sidelines, is Netanyahu pushing his own soldiers to the brink, forcing them through wave after wave of combat that leaves many broken inside? After roughly 1,000 days of continuous war, Israel now fears that its system for treating wounded soldiers is at risk of collapse, overwhelmed by the scale of need. On July 2nd, officials reported that more than 26,200 wounded troops have applied for rehabilitation since October 7th, 2023, a caseload far beyond what planners originally expected. The Defense Ministry has warned that, without urgent reforms and more resources, the rehabilitation system could buckle under pressure and simply fail those who need it most. Around 65% of all registered wounded are now being treated primarily for psychological conditions, rather than visible battlefield injuries. The ministry says post-traumatic stress, chronic anxiety, and depression remain the most common challenges, showing how deeply the war is affecting soldiers' minds. Officials estimate that roughly 17,000 of the wounded are coping with some form of psychological trauma, a number that continues to rise with every new operation. Of that group, about 7,700 soldiers are battling both physical wounds and serious psychological injuries, making their rehabilitation far more complex and costly. The Defense Ministry projects that the total number of wounded veterans in the system could exceed 90,000 during 2026, stretching clinics and staff to the limit. By 2028, that figure is expected to approach 100,000 wounded veterans, locking in a long-term burden that will last well beyond this conflict. Officials believe that nearly half of all future cases could involve significant psychological trauma, confirming that mental health will remain at the core of the crisis. A public committee examining the system has urged the government to allocate a much larger budget for the rehabilitation department to keep it functioning. The panel recommends appointing a dedicated case manager for every wounded service member, so no one gets lost in the bureaucracy or waits months for help. It also called for dramatically expanding access to psychological treatment across the system, arguing that early, sustained care is the only way to prevent a deeper mental health catastrophe. Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi warned that Tehran would school Israel if it chose to defy the US-brokered Memorandum of Understanding aimed at ending the recent conflict. Araghchi's remarks came after Israeli Defense Minister Israel Katz issued fresh threats against Iran's leadership following the recent ceasefire arrangements. According to Israeli media reports, Katz said Iran's Supreme Leader Mujtaba Khamenei was marked for death if Tehran continued what Israel described as hostile actions. Responding to those remarks, Araghchi said the terms of the Islamabad Memorandum of Understanding were clear, public, and binding on all parties involved. The Iranian foreign minister also claimed that US President Donald Trump had committed Washington to restraining Israel under the terms of the agreement. Abbas Araghchi said, and I quote, "POTUS has committed the US to muzzling its pets in Tel Aviv. If they ignore their master, Iran will school them," unquote. Katz also accused Iran of using negotiations to extract concessions while insisting that Israel would never allow Tehran to obtain nuclear weapons under any circumstances. The Israeli defense minister, along with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, has also warned that a third direct confrontation between Israel and Iran remains a real possibility if tensions escalate again. Araghchi, however, cautioned that any military threat or hostile action directed against Iran would be met with an immediate, decisive, and powerful response from Tehran. Iran has called for a new Gulf security order that excludes the United States and all other outside military powers from the region. Iranian Foreign Minister said Tehran is ready to help establish a new regional security framework led by countries within the Gulf. Araghchi said recent wars had demonstrated it was time for Gulf nations to take responsibility for safeguarding their own security. Araghchi made the remarks after holding talks with Iraq's National Security Advisor, according to Iran International. The foreign minister said the proposed regional framework should also promote broader economic cooperation among neighboring countries. Araghchi argued that lasting regional stability could only be achieved through closer coordination and cooperation among Gulf states. He said military powers from outside the region should have no role in shaping the proposed future Gulf security architecture. Tehran presented the proposal as a lesson drawn from the region's recent security crises and repeated military confrontations. IRGC-affiliated FARS said a commentary discussing nuclear weapons did not represent the agency's official editorial position or policy. The agency said the article appeared in its user-generated content section and should not be interpreted as an official FARS position. The clarification came after the commentary claimed Iran had no alternative but to obtain a nuclear weapon for deterrence. The article argued nuclear deterrence was the only effective way to eliminate the military option against Iran. The commentary also claimed a nuclear weapon could help keep any future conflict with the US and Israel under control. The article surfaced as the United States and Iran continued exchanging military strikes amid tensions over the Strait of Hormuz. Subsequently, the Wall Street Journal reported US-Iran talks in Switzerland had stalled as hostilities between both sides intensified. However, Reuters reported the United States and Iran would continue negotiations as both sides sought to preserve the interim memorandum of understanding. A US official told Reuters the technical discussions would address every major provision contained in the interim memorandum of understanding. The official said commercial shipping would continue moving freely through the Strait of Hormuz while negotiations remained underway. Axios, citing US officials, also reported Washington and Tehran had agreed to halt hostilities while diplomatic efforts continued. The report said both sides were expected to meet in Doha later this week to address their dispute over the Strait of Hormuz. The diplomatic push came after an Iranian official said the planned June 28 talks had been abandoned following recent US strikes. Tehran said the conditions outlined in the interim memorandum of understanding had not been fully implemented before any fresh negotiations.
$25 करोड़ गरीब गरीबी को परास्त करके बाहर निकले।
For the good of our nation, let's work together and let's truly make America great again.
The fastest news breaks.
Requested PM saying that look, you will have to speak to Putin and to Zelensky.
The biggest news makers.
The relationship with India is probably the most important bilateral relationship the U.S. will have for the rest of this century.
The capital delivered quite an election result today.
Expert analysis.
The million-dollar question today is how to stop this dance of death.
Ground reports.
I'm standing at the crossroad of the Kumbh Mela. Behind me are more than 100 entry ghats.
Long-form interviews.
Exclusionary politics is reflected in Manipur case as well. You don't bother because this is a small state.
Deep dive into burning issues.
It's often said DRC could be the richest country in the whole world. It's because of what sits underneath.
Why exactly did the US topple the Sheikh Hasina government?
HT videos. We don't just break news, we break it down.